Good evening, everyone. Can you all hear me? Okay, good. Thank you and for enduring this late in the afternoon. Sorry for all the delays, but hopefully you'll be exposed to a very fun and entertaining and informative panel of folks here. The topic of our panel is From Africa to the World, Talent Development and the Exporting of African Content. My name is Narendra Reddy. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of the Africa Channel, a company that's been around for 18 years, based out of Los Angeles. And our focus has been presenting African content to principally North American and global audiences on our cable platform as well as on our digital platforms. I want to quickly start by giving you the highlights of our esteemed panelists who come from all different sectors, and then we'll dive into some of the key topics. Starting with Ava Hall, right in the middle, who is our Head of Content and Brand at the Africa Channel. She's had over 20 years of television experience in content development and production. She was tapped to launch BET's international networks as Vice President of Programming and Production. And when BET was acquired by Viacom, she became the Vice President of Programming and Brand Advancement and was key in launching BET in Africa, France, UK, and South Korea. So a very extensive international experience. Next up, Ayana Lonian, Director of Content Acquisition and Head of Worldwide Major Studio Licensing Strategy for Amazon Prime Video. Ayana is responsible for negotiating global content licensing agreements with major US studios and television networks groups. She's responsible for managing the dedicated team of content executives who acquire locally produced and US Hollywood content on behalf of Prime Video services in sub-Saharan Africa. Prior to her current role at Amazon, Ayana was on the affiliate sales and content distribution team for the Walt Disney Company and ESPN Media Networks, has attended Harvard University and Northwestern University as well. Next is Nikita Adams, Head of Television Development at Folding Chair Productions, which has an overall deal with Warner Brothers. Nikita is a highly accomplished senior television executive with, again, over 20 years in the business, a graduate of Howard University. She started her career with Ava at BET, then went on to work for New Line Cinema, 20th Century Fox, was head of development for Jamie Foxx's King Entertainment, as well as worked with Forrest Whitaker's Junto Films. And she also had a stint as a talent agent at Paradigm Talent Agency, and so brings a lot of unique perspectives, both as a development executive and as a talent agent. Next is, and certainly last but not least, is we have two people. Reena Singh, who is currently has started her own shingle, Lion Forge Creative Group, but most recently was head of development and current series at Disney Plus in the US. Prior to Disney, she also had stints at 20th Century Fox, NBC Universal, and shows that she helped develop include The Mysterious Benedict Society, The Santa Clauses with Tim Allen, American Born Chinese with Michelle Yeoh, and a bunch of other very recognizable series. And last but not least is David Kaiser, a literary agent based in Johannesburg, South Africa. With his partner, Effie Lennon Ritchie, they started their first agency in South Africa to help develop talent. Prior to that, David was at Kasarota Ramsey and Associates in London, representing talent as well, and has a unique experience of working both in South Africa and London, and would bring some unique perspectives to this panel. Okay, so that quickly brings you up to speed at this very established panel that we have, but I'm going to ask them one key question so that you get a little bit of a sense of who they are. And the question goes as this. And we'll start actually with you and we'll go down here, Reena. Mm-hmm. What advice would you give your younger self to best prepare you for your current career path?
I thought you were going to ask what advice would I give my young self, just in general, and that would have been listen to your parents and go to medical school. But I didn't do that. So in terms of the career that I have, I see one other person give me a thumbs up. No, in terms of my current career, and it's something that I was very blessed to have a mentor give me this advice early on in my career, and it's something that I pass on to young executives starting out and young producers starting out, and that is your job is to be an advocate for talent. I think a lot of us forget that, and I think that's just your number one position or your number one job responsibility as an executive or a producer is really be there for your talent. So when you're noting or you're guiding talent, it really is about protecting their artistic integrity as you help them balance their vision and the commercial needs of whatever platform or network they're creating a show or a movie for.
Ayanna?
No, it's a great question, and it's interesting. I can't honestly look back at my childhood and connect sort of that period of time to what I do today, because what I do today didn't really exist as a function. I mean, working in content acquisition for a global streaming service, it literally, I'm old enough where I remember my father brought home a cable set-top box. It was like the size of a microwave and brought it home, and we were like, Dad, what is that? Like, it's HBO, what is that? Like, so I would say the younger advice I would give to myself is actually to trust my instincts and act on my instincts a little bit sooner than I have done in the past. And I've learned to action my instincts and trust that sort of bottom of my belly gut instinct, in business decisions that of course also exists in like your personal life as well. But that would be advice that I would give to myself. Trust your instincts and act on your instincts sooner rather than later, because more often than not, at least in my case, I find them to be accurate.
Thank you.
Very good. I would say to my younger self, be the consummate student, to understand that there are lessons on the mountaintop as well as the valley, and also in the journey to both of them. I think I'd also say, as you get into leadership, to always remember to be developing leaders as you go and empower them. Yeah, I think that would be it.
That's so beautiful. Can you hear me? That's so beautiful to hear from Ava, because she's one of my mentors, and she's actually said that to me, both of those. So I'm grateful to hear that. I think what I would say to my younger self is I definitely believe in artistry, and I believe in the power of artistry, and I think you either have it or you don't. You're either an artist or you're not. And so I would have spent less time trying to develop myself as an artist, and I would have spent more time understanding business early on, right? I got a degree in television and film, but I minored in business, and I would have done it the opposite way, because when you have a business background and you're a strong business professional, that business knowledge can carry to any realm that you decide to go in. And so I wish I would have become more of a business expert earlier in my career.
I think that's a really good tip.
I was trying to impress you.
I did something similar, going to drama school thinking I was going to be an actor, and I was like, oh, actually, do you know what, this for me is not for me. But I kind of want to take both of yours and mold it into one. Ayanna, like, trust your creative instinct and your voice. If you've got an opinion, it's going to differ from others. And the only way you can champion, I think, true artistry and talent is by believing in what you're championing. So if you have an opinion on a film or a script or a talent, like, just listen to your gut, because loads of people are going to disagree with you, but that doesn't mean to say that you're wrong.
Thank you. So let's dive into this, and I'm sure many of you are going to have multiple perspectives. And one of the things I like about panels is we don't have to necessarily agree, but you're just going to have different perspectives, and you folks can come to some of your own conclusions. But let's start. Rena, I'm going to ask you a question.
Sure.
You have worked both as a seller of content from a studio side and then most recently buying content for Disney Plus, and so you had the luxury of being on both sides of the coin. What are you seeing in terms of the appetite for African-inspired, African stories, African talent, the appetite for those types of narratives by buyers, and particularly Disney in your case, in the US? And then I have a follow-up question to that.
Oh, I think that there's quite the appetite building. There's incredible interest in stories and storytellers from this continent. So I think the outlook is really optimistic. And I think the outlook is optimistic for a few reasons. One is, look, there's an infrastructure that's already been built. I'm probably stepping on your second question, but there's an infrastructure that's already been built by streamers like Amazon. So there is already a pipeline for content from around the world. I don't know why we're even saying global content. It's just content is content at this point, in my humble opinion. I think that's going to become more and more so. Specifically speaking from the United States perspective, another, I think, key ingredient for the expansion of African content into the U.S. marketplace is the audience. And, an audience that has been primed by streamers to be patient with content from around the world. We read subtitles now, which is really exciting. And also, coming from Disney, we studied a lot of the younger generations, Generation Z and Alpha a lot, and the trends of those young people, and sort of predicted where they're going to go and what their programming needs are going to be going into the future. One of the most exciting things that I gathered from the research was that they are a generation that for the first time in 2019, over 50% of children in the United States under the age of 16 declared that they were majority minority, which means that they identified as ethnically or racially diverse. So they are minorities. So that's really exciting. And one of the trends that we noticed with them is that they don't just want to fit in. They want to celebrate their culture. They're very interested in their heritage. And so from a programming standpoint, I think that opens the doors when it comes to shows or movies about, from around the world and from storytellers around the world. And hopefully not just about their heritage, but they'll be open to other cultures as well. The third sort of thing that's exciting is the economics. There is a real disruption in the marketplace in the United States, specifically with a lot of content creators, programmers trying to figure out how to monetize, specifically TV right now. And I think there is going to be a hunger for content from good content, wherever we can find it, pretty soon. And so that's a bonus for everyone. There's also less of an appetite, I think, for people to own Disney is notoriously known for owning everything. A lot of people needed to have rights to everything. I'm seeing a little bit of softening in that regard. There are platforms and networks that are open to licensing more now, to co-productions. So there's more opportunity to come in, I think, and have a little bit more of a piece of the pie. So you're going to see, I think, different financial models and a patchwork of financing. And just, again, I love disruption. I think it does offer a lot of opportunity if you look at it a little glass full.
Nikita or Ayana, do you have perspectives on the same question?
No, she said it all, but I just have to say I'm so happy to be here. I really am. I've been looking forward to this panel for months, and I think for obvious reasons, it's awesome to be in South Africa, but kind of piggybacking on what she said, there's so much opportunity here, and I'm not just saying that in terms of like an optimistic way, but it has become more of a global appetite for African content, and I hesitate to say global and African content because obviously it's such a big landmass, but English-speaking African content. And people who have a POV that can become universal, that's something that the market is looking for. And I think there are these white spaces that can be filled from a lot of English-speaking African countries. And so this is where the hotbed is. Like, this is where the stories are. This is where, like, all the fly art and the fashion and where a lot of the worlds come together. And so this is where I think the art can be built. I think this is where the technology will be created, because technology is as much king as content is, I believe. And then also the business structures. There are some business definitions that have not even been created yet for the kind of content that's being created, I think, in this country and a lot of other countries. And I think now is the time, and this could be the place where all of that's being created. And so the genesis of that is always an exciting time. So I'm very excited to be here.
Awesome.
And I just wanted to say that.
Ayana, do you have any thoughts on that? On the appetite for African content as you acquire content from all parts of the world. Do you see that there is a growing appetite for that principally outside of the continent?
Oh, I mean, absolutely. I do think there's a broad and appetite for locally produced content, and not just with. Sometimes I think there's a presumption that's just with customers, I would say, of like diasporic descent who live outside of the continent. But I would argue that there's broad interest, demand, and appetite for really customers of mainstream descent as well as diasporic descent, in the United States, in Europe, really around the world, in Brazil, quite honestly, in parts of Asia. So our experience and my experience would indicate that there absolutely is that appetite there. Our orientation from a Amazon Prime Video standpoint is a little bit, our desire is to be like the most local of global streaming services. So kind of as that relates to like locally produced content, our orientation is to lean into stories that are, multidimensional, that we use the term hyper local, that are like authentic, that really reflect the lived experiences of storytellers, filmmakers, content creators on the continent, and we in turn think that those types of stories will travel the best and will resonate with customers outside of the content, again, independent of their own personal background, diasporic descent or mainstream sort of descent. So we believe that the best local stories will travel, and we've certainly seen that with things like Gangs of Lagos, one of our first original sort of productions that we've premiered outside of the continent, LOL Naija, other things. All of our experience would indicate that appetite is there, and we see the data and the interest. So I absolutely believe that appetite exists today, and it's just to some extent a matter of helping to showcase and bring those stories, showcase them to our customers outside of the continent. But the appetite and the interest is there.
So these three ladies have clearly established there is a demand. Ava, yet when I go to markets like MIPCOM, even when I come here, I mean, other than the few series like Shakalimbe and Gangs of Lagos, it still seems like compared to the amount of content that is put out in the marketplace in MIPCOM, it seems very little the amount of African content that's being presented by distributors, by networks. So we've established a demand. What is some of your perspectives as to why there's not a whole lot more African content out there in the global marketplace?
Yeah, it's a great question. I have to believe that there is the organic growth of continent or content from the continent being exported. I liken it to the trend of music, how Afrobeats has grown exponentially and has become a part of pop culture and mainstream. And I'm hopeful to see the same trajectory for content. But until we get to that place where there is a large export of content, I think we have to make sure gatekeepers are there and understand understand the culture, understand the content, and know how to fill the pipeline and meet the demand. I think, having platforms such as, the Africa Channel that is targeting and has a place for the content, and there's certainly other platforms, but I think, well-informed gatekeepers, platforms for specific demographics are great ways to kind of help meet the demand.
Great, thank you. So I want to build on something Ayana said, which was one of the strategies that is part of Amazon's strategy, which is the hyper-local but global. I'm going to address this question to Nikita. Being hyper-local, having a very local strategy, can that, and I guess the question may be a little loaded, so you can answer it which way you want. Can that coexist with the same content being globally appealing? And the reason I ask that question is sometimes hyper-local gets hyper-local budgets. And in order to get the big budgets that go behind Hollywood projects, but if you keep selling something as hyper-local, people tend to put that in a bit different budget camps. So I'm curious about some of your perspectives. How can the two competing things coexist?
This is my POV. Now, this isn't in the Bible, what I'm about to say. This is just how I look at it. Something that's hyper-local, or I learned a phrase yesterday, local for local. I think there's so much power there because that's how hip-hop was created. Hip-hop was created in the Bronx, New York, in one neighborhood for Black people in that neighborhood, just a few blocks. And then it became a multi-billion-dollar business. It took a few years before it went global. There was a business model that had to be created around it. There was technology that had to be created in order for it to go global. But I do believe that hip-hop has stayed very true to what it was created to be. Obviously, it then moved to like the southern part of the U.S. country, and you got a different version of the southern and then the West Coast rappers and that sort of thing. But hip-hop is local for local. It was made for African-American Black people in a certain region, and it became huge. I would say, to apply that to where we are today, to the filmmakers who are here, and I'm assuming they're filmmakers here, right? They're writers and directors, right? Like if you create, if you're a writer or director, right? So I would say, again, this is my POV. If you create something that is perceived local, right? Like let's say you want to tell a story about corruption in your local community, right? And the local government. And if that's important to you, if you want to tell a very localized story about sanitation or about how women are treated in your community, something that's very local, I would encourage you and challenge you to find an elevated way to tell that smaller story so that it can travel a little bit more, right? So instead of, using, for example, two little girls who go to play in the marketplace and one is kidnapped and then the other goes to fight. If you want to tell a story about how women are seen in your community, perhaps you do an animation and they're female donkeys or something like that. Like you find a way to elevate it, right? And you still have the same large scale thing that you want to communicate, but use different elements, use different set pieces, because some of the stories are similar, right? Like a story about corruption in South Africa could be similar to a story about corruption in Kenya, and you would have the two stories canceling each other out. But if you find an elevated way to express your why now, that's still a very localized story. it may can travel a little bit more, but you're still staying true to who you are. Thus, hip hop, right? Like it's a more elevated way. It's a Nas versus Kool Herc, right? It's a more elevated way to get your story out, and then I think it could travel more. That's if that's the kind of stories that you tell. I think that's very powerful. Tyler Perry did the same thing. Tyler Perry was Madea. Madea in the morning, Madea in the noonday, Madea in the midnight hour. And Tyler Perry is a household name in the States. He told one story in one way. He had one character. To me, that's local for local. Tyler Perry is now a billionaire. I think there's a business model that has to go with your local branded stories. If you have a business model, and what I learned from my dear friend in the back, one of my former colleagues, if there's also technology that will support that technology could be Amazon, that technology could be the Africa Channel. If there is a technology that will help that story travel, then you'll be successful. Ideally, right? There's success. I don't think you should be afraid of telling those stories. I don't think you should shy away from it because there is evidence that you can be globally successful if you stick to those stories that are local for local.
Thank you. Any other perspectives on that?
No, but it's interesting. I mean, your comments are making me realize again, hyper local may mean different things to different, constituents, filmmakers, et cetera. The only thing I would add is that something, in my opinion, can be hyper local, but that does not mean it doesn't have universal themes, universal elements that again will resonate, because I think that's part of what does make things travel. It's the relatability, and I think you can tell stories that. A wonderful example, we recently, acquired a movie and premiered it on our service within the last couple of months, a movie called Sista. And for those who know Biotin Stevens in Nigeria, she's a wonderful, Nollywood filmmaker. And at its highest level, I mean, please go watch the movie. It's a movie about a woman who is a single mother who has, got separated from her husband, or really the father of her children. They reconnect later in life when her children are older, and it's really just a story about all these different, sub-stories. A single mother of children who are now reconnecting with a father figure they've not known. How the father figure is in turn reconciling maybe his past guilt from this situation with his current wife, and having to explain, hey, I had this kind of pre-life you didn't know about, and how they all work through that situation. At its highest level, that is what the story is about. It is a very local Nigerian story, but it has universal themes, and it's traveled so well across our own at least customer base. I think by virtue of that, it's a relatable story. It's a very hyper local story, but it in turn travels. So I don't think maybe your comments are like, okay, what does hyper local may mean different things to different people, but I would just reinforce that a hyper local story can be told in its, in indigenous vernacular. It doesn't have to be produced in English. It can have, but it's those universal elements that actually make it a little accessible to other viewers, whether that's their immediate lived experience or not. So
I'm going to say yes and yes, and then I'm going to say and. Because what I'm hearing from both of you is it's that authenticity, right?
Yeah.
That is local, and then is making it universal. Because it's, you're writing something that is truly from your experience, from your point of view, from your part of the world, it is authentic, and then that message is specific, and thus universal, right? Like that's the formula I feel like that people are relating to when they're watching content from around the world. I had the pleasure yesterday to meet Diane Moodley, who's a South African filmmaker. I first talked to her 6 years ago, and I had seen a film of hers, Keeping Up with the Kandasamis. And I am of Indian descent. My parents were born and raised in India. I was born and raised in the United States. And of course, Diane is from South Africa and of Indian descent. So, all from all from Indian heritage, but different points of views. And yet this film resonated with my parents, with me, my siblings, and obviously her, the filmmaker. Because although it is a South African story and definitely told through that lens, from that specific community within South Africa, and that story, again, specific and authentic to her, those themes of family and love and friendship, all very, very universal and traveled, and all wrapped in humor and traveled very well. And I'm really proud of her for pursuing her films. And now there are 3 of them, about to be 4, and she has a great deal with a streamer, and she's moving on with her career. But it started with something very authentic and local, and but in doing that, universal. Yeah.
That's
But your
actually very-
question was, how do you get bigger budgets
Yeah.
for local stories that are extremely localized? And the answer is, I don't know. I don't know that that's an important question to answer if you're a creator. Like if you have a story burning in you that's only for your local audience, get it out. Don't let it set you on fire. If you are a business that you want to grow, then that is a very important question that you have to answer. And then you should invest in content that, again, would travel, things that travel, comedies will travel all over the world, no matter what, where the situation is, where the setting is. A drama, crime drama. If there's a dead body, you can sell your film, you can sell your television show. Crime dramas, procedurals in the States, definitely in the UK. If there's a hospital procedural, again with the dead body, that will sell. I mean, you can find a market for it. If you have a talent attached, of course, that will sell. If you are building your brand and building your company and making money is your definition of success, and there's nothing wrong with it, I never met a check I didn't like, then you do need to be concerned with answering his question so that the result is money. If you're a filmmaker, if you're an artist, and you have a story that you want to tell that is a local, the point that I'm making is your what the world would call small story, your localized story could also be successful. But if you want to cater to your local audience, there is no problem with that. You could find success. Success will be defined in a different way, right? And you just have to make sure you understand it.
I want to come back. We'll come back again to talk about other things that artists can pay attention to allow them to preserve their authenticity, their artistry, yet be successful commercially. But before I do that, everything starts with a person and talent, right? And when we talk about talent, I'm talking about writers, directors, actors, and creating a pipeline, not just for the few established ones who manage to make it despite all the odds, but how do you build more? So, David, you've set up and you've worked in both the UK markets and now you're setting up in South Africa. Share with us some of your perspectives. What do you look for when you decide you're going to represent a client? And then after you represent them, what do you do to get their voice into the world, not just in the South African market, but particularly globally?
Well, they're both obviously intrinsically related. The first thing with any writer or director that I'm looking at and considering their work, the work has to speak to me, right? I have to love it. I have in the past, for my sins, cynically taken on talent that I thought, easy sell. I don't love the work, but easy sell. Never sold any of their stuff because my heart wasn't in it. I didn't know how to pitch it. I wasn't there for it. So the first thing is just always like really responding to the story, but not just the story and the work. I also have to really get on with the people because it's a relationship business at the end of the day. We have to have a laugh. I have to be able to be candid and frank with the clients. So yeah, number one, work. Number two, the person. And then, can I see a way, do I know avenues to pursue in order to pitch this work and this talent? And look, you don't always make the right decision. Sometimes you love the person, you love the work, and no one out there yet is listening to me because they're not seeing it either. But, hopefully, when I'm considering the work, I already have people in mind. I'm like, Rena would love this. Okay, I'm gonna, great start. I'll take it to Rena first and see what she thinks. And then what was your other question again? How do we?
What are the things you look for in them to represent them?
Yeah.
And once you represent them, what do you do to make sure that they
Uh,
earn a livelihood?
Yeah, well, I spend my days making friends with producers and financiers and buyers and whoever is picking up content and is interested in film and television, who wants to develop it further. I make as many friends as possible. In South Africa, yes, of course. Nigeria, I'm still working.
Yeah.
I've got a lot more to do in Nigeria and other parts of Africa. The UK was my home network for a long time, so I'm keeping that very much alive. And the States as well, and more places like France and Germany, who I have to say seem to be more sort of receptive to South African and African content than our friends on Mud Island. Obviously not always, because shows like Devil's Peak, British producers who I've known for a long time and who saw and who've made a South African show for South Africa that hopefully that they will go out and vigorously sell now. My job is all about networking and making friends and being as lovely as possible. Hopefully.
So I have one more question for the panel, and then I'm going to open it up for questions from the audience. So, despite where you are, whether you're in America, UK, Africa, whatever story that you have, and as an artist you want to tell, there are still certain things, as all of you are curating, and there are still certain things people have to pay attention to get the green light, right? Irrespective of whether it's hyperlocal or whether you're telling a story from Kentucky or from Nairobi. So, Ayana, you have worked with acquiring and working with creators all across the globe, not just Africa. Rena, you've done this as well. All of you have buyers. Love for you to share some perspectives of the things that people have to pay attention to as creators or as producers in order to help you get the green light, the rules that people have to follow, that and particularly from you, Ayana, if certain people are doing it better, what can we learn from them? Or certain territories are doing it better, what can we learn from them?
Well, I think there are a couple of things that one can do. And this is not necessarily in stack rank order, as I would say. The first and foremost is just remember that when you're engaging in a conversation, I guess, with a distributor or commissioner or what have you, just first and foremost, think about their priorities and their respective strategies. I think there's sometimes a tendency to talk about the global streamers as if we're all sort of monolithic and as if we all have the same sort of programming strategies. And I was saying, I know very well, of course, Amazon Prime Video, our orientation, but it's local first, global second. But I hypothesize that some other streamers may have actually a different strategy, and it really may be global first, local second. So just first and foremost, I would say think about the audience and think about your project and its relevancy to kind of what their approach may be, and even don't be shy about asking the question, because again, I work with many partners, the wonderful privilege of doing that around the world, but it's still relatively rare for a partner, and again, I'm talking all partners, to actually stop and ask me, oh, what are your current priorities? And let me think about some projects that may align with that versus me just sort of coming with a project with a little bit more of an orientation towards my own priority. So that's just one bit of advice. The second bit of advice is, again, come not just with the idea. Again, for us, first and foremost, a potential project always starts with sort of a concept or an idea, and we do look for that passion from our partners. That we always say, help us understand why we as Amazon must tell this story now. What is it about? Why? What makes it authentic? What makes it local? Why are you in turn sort of passionate about that? Now, the second things that we may be looking for are, of course, Talk to me about your team. Talk to me, it was really questions around like the execution of the project. I always tell folks there's no bad project. And in my experience working on the continent, there's so many wonderful stories. There's genres that have been underexplored. They're wonderful stories. So it's not a shortage of ideas and stories to tell. Where there may be some opportunities just around having practical discussions around execution risk and how is your respective team or in concert with our team going to help risk mitigate around the actual execution. And that's where I think discussions need to have. So I would just say, in addition to bringing the passion, telling us about the idea, asking us and having a conversation around mutual alignment of strategies, also just think about like the practical questions that a distributor or commissioning agent, et cetera, may have just around the execution of the project itself. And I think there's this continued opportunity there. So that would be my advice.
I like that term, reducing execution risk. Rena, what are some of your things that you can do to help reduce execution risk?
Yeah, I think when I listen to, just drafting off what you just said, one of the things I love about television, I've always loved about TV, and what gets me excited about working in television is the word collaboration. I love that this is a collaborative business, and that is the difference between, say, indie filmmaking and television, right? Like, so when you work in television, now you have to open up your process. To what you just said, find out what your buyers are looking for. I'm not saying then pander your, change your vision to, or turn yourself into a pretzel as a creator to fit that need or desire from that platform or network. But I do think having that awareness, because if you do sell to them, you will be collaborating and you will be making adjustments to satisfy the needs of that platform. No matter what anyone says to you about, oh, no, we just want your vision and that's it. That's not, I don't 100% believe in. That's not been my experience. So I do think, to just open yourself up to development, open yourself up to collaborations, and be willing to look at your messaging, making sure it's engaging and entertaining and universal. I think all of that is important. And I think, again, the difference between indie filmmaking and television is just, there are more, you're not the only, you are the most important as the creator, chef in the kitchen, but there are going to be others there, especially when you have a world where there is a patchwork of financing and there's going to be more voices giving you notes. So hopefully you've got a great producer with you who is protecting your artistic integrity, and you should always hold on to your creative vision, but to remember always that this is a collaborative vision. We package a lot in the United States when we bring projects together, and that's not always a bad thing. I think you've done a great job, Ava, at Africa Channel and Tax Studios of bringing some, I've just heard recently, some of the talent that you've brought together with local creators here on the continent in Africa, and how those projects are coming together. And these are tried and true showrunners and A-list talent. So that can help take a really great idea and a really great story and make it even more appealing to a buyer. So that's one way you can help a package.
Thank you for that.
Yes.
I've been told I can give 2 or 3 questions to the audience, so whoever wants to go.
Our time is up already?
I know, we started late.
We started late. But
And they're ushering us off.
go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for sharing your intel with us. It's so valuable. You touched briefly on the concept of attachment to projects. For want of a better example, Good Will Hunting, when Ben Affleck and Matt Damon obviously shopped the script around and then finally attached Robin Williams and Gus Van Sant, I think, as a director. Could you expand a little bit on that? Because, I'm fascinated by how they went about that process, but how would one go about attaching someone now, in order to get a global story made locally? Yeah.
Are you asking for television or for a film project? Or are you just asking?
Film, and so specifically film, I think, in this regard.
You can answer.
Well, I don't think I mean that great example for maybe one side of things, but I mean sometimes I think attaching talent too early can limit where you might be able to take the project. Because if I'm going to put a bunch of talent attached to this project and then take it to a buyer, maybe it's a streamer, maybe it's Mnet, maybe it's BBC, whoever, you know,
You could take it to me and I could say, I hate Ben Affleck.
exactly.
Yes.
How
Yes.
dare you?
And now you
Yeah.
already have a deal.
And
with
now
them.
you already have a
Yeah.
deal with him, and how are you going to tell Ben that you don't want to work with him? And that's going to be awful. So, you
Yeah.
know,
So the bar
have to
is
be
really
careful.
high to attach in front of the camera talent before a sell. You would almost need to get Ben Affleck today.
Yeah.
Not the Goodwill Hunting Ben Affleck.
Yeah.
And like, sorry,
No, please.
I was going to say, and you were saying it's collaborative, right? Well, if I'm taking a project to a producer, or for example, if one of my clients has written several drafts of a script, and I'm like, okay, but don't overwrite it, because whoever you take it to are going to want to put their DNA on that project as well. So, you know, it's going to be rewritten again. So maybe don't attach too many things
Yeah.
at once.
So-
But you're
for
right
TV
to ask the question because it's tricky.
yeah.
It is tricky, but and the reason why I asked if it was TV or film, so for TV, I would say it would be important for you to attach a writer, to attach the writer, not to have the writer write it. So, and one thing we didn't get a chance to talk, it's so much we wanted to share, but one thing we didn't get a chance to talk about is IP. And that's another reason why this place is such a hotbed and there's so much opportunity, because just as much stories, as just as many stories as you all have, you have even more IP. So if you have an amazing piece of IP, you can then attach a writer who will help you come up with a pitch, and then you take that pitch to a buyer, or you take that pitch to Ben Affleck or something like that. You begin to package that way. I think the necessity would be the writer, right? For the most part, you cannot go wrong. If you have let's say you yourself are a writer with no credits, you're a junior writer who has an amazing vision, you may then want to attach a more senior writer who's a supervisor.
Yeah.
You would have an agent to help you put together that strategy. You would have a producer, as she said, to help you put together that strategy. Attachments are important, but what's important is the order you attach people in.
I guess I was
Hold
saying.
on, let's
oh,
get another question in before, because they're running out of time.
No.
Hello. Okay. Thank you so much for this was a great session. Thank you so much. My question is to Ayana and David quickly. We've seen a growing relationship between literary and television in terms of adaptations. So I just wanted to know from David, what are usually the qualities of the books that streamers like Amazon would like to adapt most of the time? And also Ayana, same question, what do you look for from books that you'd like to adapt for your platforms that will obviously be like in a global platform?
So very confusing.
In an African context, please.
Very confusingly, literary agent in this context does not mean books. No, I know. It's very confusing, even for me, sometimes. So I'm going to pass that one over to Ayana, because
Well, let me think, and it is a great question, and we have actually, dedicated teams within our studio, quite honestly, who do nothing but read books, on behalf of our studio, thinking about adaptations. But I would say, from a sub-Saharan Africa standpoint, and apologies, my response may seem like it's a little redundant to what, I was discussing earlier. But again, we look for just sort of multi-dimensional, compelling, rich stories that we think, quite honestly, tell a good story and have with developed characters, et cetera. So just multi-dimensional, nuanced, multifaceted stories. And I think that one thing about adaptations is that comes through on paper and in novels especially is you really, the lived experience can come through in novels, except of course we have to adapt it, and there's a lot of the art and science to adapting something, taking it from one medium to another, but we still look for multi-dimensional stories, stories that we think tell nuanced, wonderful, accurate reflections of lived experiences from individuals on the continent. So it's in large part sort of the same, I guess I would say, aspects and criteria that we looked for just, either when we acquire a project or even if we're not adapting necessarily a novel or getting adaptation rights.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question. Whoever grabs the mic first. We'll squeeze you in.
Thank you, thank you. I appreciate that. And thank you for the panel. I'm sad that indeed there was more to share, but it's like cut off. That's such a pity. But I'd like to end with a question I think a lot of content creators or writers always are asking in the back of their minds. Ayana, as you were talking, you kept on saying, come to us, come to us. So how does one get your attention?
How do I?
And not just for you, but like everyone across, you know what I mean? Just everyone on the stage. Like how do filmmakers get your attention?
So each person is going to have a different answer. So I'd ask you each to quickly say what's the best way to do it.
My email's on my website, literally, or you can come scan this. I'm always keen to hear and meet new writers and directors. Even if it's not for now, it's always just good to establish relationships for later when you guys are ready or when I'm ready.
So I'll say two things quickly. First of all, it's important to know your audience. And if this is the audience, you need to know what the person's strengths are and what they do. For example, you would not approach me the same way you approach an agent. And you would not approach an agent the same way you would approach Ava, who's a television executive, who's on the buying side. So know who the person is and their capacity before you run up on them, because you have one time. If you try to sell me a magazine, like I have a great idea for a magazine, I'll never want to talk to you again for the rest of my life, because you don't know what you're talking about. So that's one. Make sure you know who your audience is. I would say the second thing, and this is very important, especially for folk in the independent space, is make sure your conversations are mutually beneficial. Don't walk up to anyone to try to extort as much from them as you can. Make sure when you're engaging someone, you have something to offer and you want to get something back. It's a volley, right? I have an idea for you. Maybe I can help you satisfy a need that I saw recently that you have, all right? Try to create a volley. Don't just have a hungry hand out.
Ava?
Well said. Can you hear me? No. I would say, I look for things that are extremely unique. Those things that are game changing, and those things that are, what's next, what's hot, what matters. So I'm always looking for a unique perspective. Yeah. No.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great question. The practical realities are, from an Amazon standpoint, I mean, the good thing is there are different touch points for interfacing with our content teams, be it our creative development teams or our content acquisition teams. We also have an element of Prime Video called Prime Video Direct, where independent filmmakers can actually self-publish content into our catalogs in 170 countries around the world. So we've tried to introduce different mechanisms and touch points so that content providers can reach out to us. But from a human resource perspective, our teams are ultimately very small. So I would say finding me, here, pitching our creative development teams. Sometimes our teams are so small that it actually does take us time. I mean, we, from an Amazon standpoint, we touch and watch almost every piece of content on our service, so it actually just takes us time. We usually have a backlog of content, and it not just for wonderful locally produced content, but there's also US-centric content, other content that we're acquiring from around the world. So it just takes us a little bit of time. So I would say be patient, but I would say reach out to us, reach out to me, reach out to our teams, be patient. And my other bit of advice would be don't rush the meeting. It kind of goes back, I think sometimes it does take time to create a touch point, get an access point. So there might be a fear of okay, let me rush and have that sort of pitch meeting right now. I would say actually take your time, have the pitch meeting when you're ready and feel like you're going to come sort of with your best A game. The door for us, it's not ever a one-time thing. The door to work with us doesn't ever shut permanently, but I would say still don't rush to have that initial meeting. Know that we're here, take your time to prepare for it, but reaching out to our content acquisition teams, our creative development teams, of certainly leveraging something like PVD or Prime Video Direct, and those are all different ways that one can interface with effectively members of our content organization and content team.
I think if you're looking to navigate the U.S. marketplace, whether it be development, production, or searching for buyers, then you've got my email. as part of this festival. So
So
reach
out
out
of
that way.
respect for the next panel, we're going to have to wrap this up, but thank you very much for being part of this panel.
We
Thank
gotta
you.
have an after party.
What's that?
We gotta have an after party to
There
keep
you
the
go,
conversation
exactly.
going.
And thank you, MIMP Africa, for inviting us to be part of this and for you all to be so patient this late in the afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you, Narendra. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well done.